Hello and welcome to the Affinity Water podcast. I am Chloe and I have the pleasure of being joined by the voice of the Affinity podcast herself. She's got almost 50 years of experience in journalism. She has an OBE in broadcasting. It's Boni Sones.
Thank you, Chloe. Very honoured to be here.
How does it feel, Boni, to be in the other seat?
Well, quite liberating because I know I am retiring after 49 years of work, but also sad because I will be leaving behind my colleagues at Affinity Water, and I've really enjoyed being part of your teams.
Yeah, you will be greatly missed.
I will be greatly missed as I nod
Boni
out.
is a big part of the team. She's always got a good story to tell and she has a lot of experience. So I'm very, very thrilled to be sat with her doing a podcast.
Thank you.
So Boni, what would you say has been the highlight of your Affinity Water journey so far?
At Affinity Water, I've learnt so much. So when I came to Affinity Water and print radio and TV over about 45 years, I'd been 8 different correspondents, home affairs, education, local government. But water, learning about water, and particularly the engineering side of water, because that resonates with my family background, Garrett Anderson's in Leiston, steam engine works, first assembly line in the world. But going out to the reservoirs, seeing the water towers, hearing Steve Baker, the Affinity Water history man who recently retired. I'm following in his footsteps in retiring. But it's been wonderful to learn.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same. I've only been here 8 months and there's so much to learn in this industry. There's stuff that I would never have known about before working for a water company. So there is so much.
And it's misreported. So that's been one of the great... I think journalism is a privilege. You can turn up, you can go through a door, whether you're going through, sort of the richest person in a village or the poorest person in a village, but be welcomed, or you somehow have curiosity and it leads you to someone's front doorstep. You interview them and you learn something. It's a privilege. The interview is about them. Mm-hmm. It's not about you. But actually at this later stage in my life, to come and learn about the water cycle and, how many hundreds of years has Affinity Waters history gone back in the southeast and its regions. It's been a real privilege, and it is a privilege.
And with your journalism experience, you must have interviewed some amazing people over the years.
After I left the BBC, set up one of the first podcast channels, Women's Parliamentary Radio Live, and I always liked interviewing the women across party in Westminster because they're campaigners. And as a journalist, I campaign for various things, including, keeping the Lido wheels open in several towns and cities I lived in. But just hearing them find out about a problem in their constituency or an injustice, and going into Westminster and sitting in the chamber and listening to this. I always liked when I was on local papers, full back, 48 years, and going in and enjoying a bit of cake and wine at someone's golden wedding anniversary. That's what I'm saying, going through someone's front door. But equally...
It's a lot more close to home.
It's close to home, but equally, journalists, we like exclusives, don't we? So first interview with John Major in the 90s when he became Prime Minister. First British man to walk in space, Michael Foale. I phoned up the NASA phone book, actually, to find out. I said, are there NEM Foales in the phone box? And... in America, and they found him, and I just rang the number and he answered. And so that was good. But also, of course, a name you'll all know is Stephen Hawking.
Oh, wow.
So, I've interviewed Stephen Hawking, now deceased sadly, but I interviewed him 4 times for Radio 4. And of course, when I got my OBE, meeting the Queen, because she was quite chatty.
Yeah. How was meeting the Queen?
Well, my family were there and they were insistent that I might fall over when I did my curtsy. But when you go into Buck Palace, they tell you how to curtsy, put your weight on the standing foot. I could stand up and show you. That's quite nice, but really humbling again, because there were charity workers and members of the armed services getting their medals pinned on, so I just assumed I'd stroll up to her, not fall over, and have my medal pinned on. But she came back to me to pin it on, and she said, exactly what do you do? So she was interested. She knew I wasn't one of the normal groups of people she gave medals to. And I said, I'd thought about a response to her. So I'd said, well, ma'am, I know that you email your grandsons, and she nodded, And I said, well, I broadcast through email and the web. So it was really nice at the beginning of the podcasting era to be able to explain to the monarch, the Queen,
what a podcast
what a podcast was. And she was interested, she was engaged. I mean, how she did it, it's incredible.
And to have an OBE is a massive achievement in itself.
And you've got the photos. I can show my grandchildren now, and when they tell me I've got things wrong, I show them my medal and say, well, hang on, show a bit of respect.
Yeah. How do you go about getting an OBE? Is that something that somebody awards you for, or
you are nominated by someone? You don't know you've been nominated. They're not allowed to tell you, and you just get a letter, and you either get a letter in the lead up to the Queen's or monarch's birthday, or in the lead up to the New Year's honours list, but you're not supposed to know that you've been nominated. And I have a tip for you: anybody can nominate someone. You just go to the relevant part of the website.
Wow. And
they shouldn't nominate people.
How did you feel when you got that letter through the door, when you
I
realised
was
you'd been
thrilled.
nominated?
You're not supposed to tell anybody.
Right.
So I didn't tell anybody. I think I might have told somebody, like the cat or the dog, but no, I didn't tell anybody.
So the cat.
So it all gets announced on New Year's Eve, and you have to keep it very quiet.
Oh, and then afterwards, did you celebrate after you got it?
There's things to do when you get called, and when you get called to Buck Palace to receive your honour. You don't know who you've got. You don't know whether it's going to be a prince, a princess, or the monarch themselves until you see the flag over Buck Palace. Oh, wow. And I went with my 3 children, who gave me a little tiara-type hat. And we knew it was the Queen because the flag was at full mast.
Wow. A huge moment, I'm sure.
A huge moment, yeah.
So how did you decide you wanted to get into podcasting? Because, as you say, you was right there from the start. So how did you decide that you wanted to get into that?
I think it was because of the internet. If you think about it, I used to do media training as part of my BBC work, and one of the stories you told in the mid-90s was how all the emails that were sent in a year were now sent in half a day. So this exponential growth of the internet was happening. And I left the BBC when I was about 45, but I still wanted to work. And I could just see it coming, because until 2005, only terrestrial channels could broadcast to the nation. So it's only really, how many years? About 15 years that individuals, I know you do a podcast, Chloe, can actually have their voices heard without having to have a license. Until 2005, you had to have a license.
Yeah.
So because I'd been with the BBC, I was quick off the mark to see that I could suddenly start broadcasting independently. And the terrestrial channels back then weren't allowed to increase their content by broadcasting through the web. So it was only individuals to do it. And, I'm on Wikipedia as one of the first, say, innovators of podcasting through the web. So I was just on it because I'd worked for the BBC and I wanted to continue a broadcast career. But it's amazingly liberating for us all now. And it does equate to the beginning of the printing press, when only the scribes could read what was said because there weren't, nothing was published much. And then suddenly you had everybody being able to read something for themselves and interpret it. So I think we're still in the infancy of this broadcasting through the web and internet revolution, and it's interesting to see where it will end up.
Mm-hmm. And the Affinity Water podcast, is that something that you brought the idea to Affinity Water to start this, or was it already in there? I think
we really did bring it under sort of various previous managers, but it was certainly something that I was interested in doing because water went underreported, and I love giving a voice to underreported groups. So we had, for the previous managers, something called the Ice Block Challenge, which was a time 3 years ago when Sir James Bevan, who was head of the Environment Agency, was talking about the fact that Britain would face a water shortage, a serious water shortage. And there was a need to publicise more the need to save water. So podcasting was one way of getting that message out about the need to save water, and it was a campaign that Affinity Water instigated called How Water Works.
And you've now grown the podcast already. You've done multiple interviews with a lot of people, and as you say, you've learnt a lot since being here. So who at Affinity Water would you say you found the most interesting to do an interview with?
Well, Wayne Novelli was quite nice when I took him out. Leakage, Mr. Leakage. How do you listen for a leak when there's lots of noise going on around you? How do they know where the leaks are? And everybody talks about AI, and this is really interesting, artificial intelligence being able to solve the problem of leakage. Well, what interests me as I bow out of Affinity Water is certainly you get more information quicker back to base about technical problems on your network, but actually it still requires the skill of the people Affinity Water employs to actually be able to detect and repair a leak. And I think that's amazing still, that you still need the human element.
I mean, as you know, recently we've done a lot of stuff around leakage, and I've been out with them and seen all of the equipment that they did. Seen all of the equipment that they use, and it's just stuff that you would never realise that we use. It's so much technology goes into it, all of the different parts.
And Maria did a podcast with her about about the sort of water treatment works and just walking around these places. With the scientists, and that never gets out externally, just how many scientists we employ. The really big highlight of my career last year, working with a colleague, was just going to the farming festival, Groundswell, where we talk about regenerative farming, which isn't the same as organic farming. It's about using less farm machinery and letting the soil stay in its natural state with the worm structure, and how that stops fertilizers or keeps them in the soil rather than running into rivers. I've got to explain this properly. But it's amazing that Affinity Water has been investing and working with these river groups and farmers and catchment management plans for the health of the rivers. And I found, I've just thought of myself, well, it's like BBC Farming today, and I've really enjoyed treading over the fields and going to the festivals that Affinity Water sponsors to hear more about, how we can make our rivers cleaner, how we can provide better food sources, and the groups we're working with to do that. I mean, that's again humbling. I'm going to keep using that word humbling, because I think when you're really interested in people and how things work, then it is humbling.
Yeah, and I guess that's a big part of the journalism, is getting stuck right in, going to the scene, going to the rivers, like you say, going to the events and seeing it firsthand for yourself. But
I think I've got a bit of a reputation for stuffing microphones under people's chins and noses when they're
that might be the 48 years worth of experience.
And I think
I
made Steve Plum, one of your directors, stand in a hole at Groundswell, because it made a better photo when he was in the hole than when he was standing above it. So you've got to be a bit bossy, and you've got to know what you want.
So what would be your piece of advice to anyone that would want to start a career in journalism with your experience?
I think, and I've got to be honest about it, you've got journalism dynasties. So, families who, promote their own. So it's quite difficult for someone from a working class background to break into journalism and to get to the top. And that is actually spoken about, in journalistic circles. How do we encourage? Because also, if you're doing an internship and you're not going to be paid, how do you get to London? How do you afford it? Where do you stay when you're in London? Then you're not going to be paid. Big issue with young people. So I think what you're doing, sort of, if you're at university, then work on your university paper. Work on something, prove that you've got a bit of an interest or a passion for it. The passion for things matters. And then when you go for a job, you can already say, look, I've got stuff in print. I've been working on my student newspaper, or I've been doing related stuff, or podcast. I've got the experience, I've got the interest, and I've got the passion. Come back to the word passion. But I think also, be brave, and also innovate. You've been innovating. It's not really very difficult to switch on some of the technology. In fact, it's so easy to use it that you can't believe that all I do is press this and it works. I think be brave, innovate, and take something with you to the interview to show that you've done something.
I mean, it seems like you just said, with the whole, you press something and it's on, that must have advanced so much from when you first started your career, because I love telling the story. Sorry, of you began on if you try and pick up a typewriter now, how did we pick up a typewriter and move it around the office? And then how did you push down those keys? I mean, your fingers must have been raw. But I did start at the East Anglian Daily Times in Ipswich in about 1975 on a typewriter. And we used to have 3 copies of every, you typed on short pieces of paper, because you had to just type 2 sentences
per page, and then tear them out. And then there'll be 3 copies. One you kept and put on your spike, one you gave to the news editor, and one got taken by a runner up the corridor to the sub's office. So, it was a constant kind of machine that you were feeding. And I did once run up that corridor to the sub's office shouting, "Hold the front page," when we'd had an aircraft crash in our region. But, technology's changed tremendously.
Yeah, now you can just get it at the push of a button in a small little device like your iPhone.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's just amazing, really. But and of course, I went back to the East Anglian Daily Times just a couple of years ago to try and trace some of those early newspaper editions I'd worked on, and we actually found the East Anglian Daily Times from the 1990s in a warehouse in Bury St Edmunds, all covered in blankets. But when you tried, they're all broad-shaped there, to open the pages, they crumbled. So it was only from, so the papers of the 70s and 80s aren't necessarily kept very well. It's only from the late 90s that these newspapers became digitised.
So you've given advice to people that want a career in journalism, but is there any interview tips for people that you would like to give them?
Again, passion. I feel this passionately. Remain curious. The blokes tend to interview people by learning everything about the subject and answering the question on behalf of the interviewee to prove they know more. I think you have to remain courteous and curious. So research, know your facts, but you don't have to learn everything, because as the interview unwinds, you're learning about that person, you're listening. So remain curious, remain courteous, and listen. If you go into the interview thinking, I've got to prove I know more than you do, I think it's boring and it's Boise. That's why I don't think it's any more important to have interviewed Tony Blair or Stephen Hawking, or in a way to have met the Queen, because just being able to go through someone's front door is a great privilege.
And you already know stuff. You already know stuff about the Queen and things like that. Right. But the local people, it's nice to interview them because you don't know them and you get to know them by interviewing them. You're sadly retiring, so have you got any plans for your retirement?
Oh, I'm very proud of my retirement plans. They're to get onto my bike, cycle a mile into the centre of Cambridge and sit with my mates and read the paper around the Cambridge Lido, the biggest Lido in Britain. I've lived in Cheltenham, Ipswich and Cambridge, and wherever I've gone, I've saved Lidos. So I've been one of the campaigners to keep Lidos open, and here in my retirement, a great privilege to be able to go and sit by one in Cambridge that's still open and is used all year round.
Oh, that would be lovely. Well, good luck for your retirement, Boni, and thank you very much for doing this podcast. Thank you very much for doing the Affinity Water podcast for the past few years. Everyone has enjoyed listening so much, and thank you for talking to us today.
As I say, I'm humbled and honoured to have been the Affinity Water podcaster, so thank you.